Can you hear me, Dr. Ayman?
Yes, I can, Dr. Ashwati.
Okay.
I was using a headset. Obviously, there's something wrong with the microphone. I'm not sure what is it. Okay, welcome everyone. This is our first anatomy lab. It's an introductory lab. So basically, we will be covering almost the same topics that we did in our anatomy introduction lecture. The difference is that we will go over some models in the other half of the lab. We will go over anatomy models so that you can feel what's you should have learned if you came on campus and go to the museum where the anatomy models are. But unfortunately, we can't do that. So this is why we are trying to simulate what will be going in the lab. So to make it short, we will go over the basic principles of regional and directional terminology. We'll talk about body planes, and we will go over the models. We have pictures of the models. Dr. Ashwati will go over them. If you have noticed in the course website or Blackboard site, I'm not talking about the practical L0B, the theory, it's the L05. You will find something called lab manual. So in the lab manual, each lab has stations, and there are a list of structures that you need to know in each station. That will make your life easy, and you will know what is expected from you in each lab. As of this moment, all the labs will be online. All the labs will be online. I'll try to record. So not in cloud, I will record to my computer. So I will press record. Desktop anatomy lab. All right. Save. Okay. So recording started. And I'm sure you received the announcement about the assignment that you need to do. And another announcement about the approaching midterm exam, both written and OSPI. So please prepare yourself. Now let's start sharing participants. Where's the more options? All right.
Doctor, is there attendance?
Was that?
Is there attendance?
Maybe. All right, so let's start sharing. So it's another chance for you all to revise the anatomy we covered in the introduction. It is relevant to both the OSPI and the written. Okay, so this is the window. Okay, come on. All right. So
Doctor, I have a question regarding the midterm. Is it gonna be on campus or is it gonna be online?
I think it will be on campus. For exams, they will be on campus. Okay, so the first concept we need to learn and we should understand is the anatomical position. It's the way we visualize the human body in our mind when we are describing the relationship of organs and structures to each other. So we have criteria that need to be fulfilled to achieve the anatomical position. So the person should be standing erect, the face and the feet should be facing forward, the palms of your hand are facing forward, and your upper limbs are on the sides of your body. So that's are the conditions that fulfill the anatomical position. You should be able, if I tell you certain description, you should be able to tell if this description matches the anatomical position or not. Okay? Now, you have seen this table before. We will go over it to make sure you all understand it very well. It's about the directional terms. Directional terms are the terms that help me tell the relationship between organs like superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, superficial, deep, proximal, distal, etc. So the first pair of terms are superior, inferior. Sometimes instead of superior, you will find cranial. So cranial has the same meaning as superior. Sometimes in textbook you find the word caudal. Caudal, it means toward the tail. Caudal, it has the same meaning as inferior. This is actually, I think it's very simple for all of you. It talks about a vertical relationship between organs. So the one on top closest to the head, we will call it is superior to the other. And the one closest to the feet, we will call it is inferior compared to the other. And the examples giving to you here is that the head is superior to your abdomen. Your abdomen is superior to your pelvis. Your chest is superior to your abdomen, etc. Or I can, instead of regions, specify organs. Your cervical vertebra is superior to your thoracic vertebra. Your breastbone is superior to your umbilicus. All these, and if you reverse the comparison, you will use inferior. So I can say the umbilicus is inferior to your chin. The abdomen is inferior to the thorax, etc. So that's the first pair of terms. The second pair are anterior, posterior. And again, notice that anterior, sometimes ventral is used instead of anterior. So ventral means the same as anterior. Dorsal means the same as posterior. Anterior, it means closest to the front of the body. Posterior, away from the front of the body, closest to the back. So that's anterior and posterior. So it describes a horizontal relationship. Here, superior, inferior, vertical. This is a horizontal relationship. So we can see your breastbone is anterior to your heart, for example. Your heart is anterior to your spine. If we reverse the comparison, we can use the word posterior. Your heart is posterior to your breastbone. Your vertebral column is posterior to the heart. The other pair of terms are medial and lateral. So we draw an imaginary line or plane in the middle of the body. it divides the body into equal right and left halves. What do we call this plane? We call it mid-sagittal or median plane. Okay? So structures, if I compare two structures, the one closer to the median plane, I'm going to call it medial to the other. The one away from the median plane, I'm going to call it lateral. For example, the heart, which is here almost very close to the median plane, is medial to the arm. The arm is away. I can reverse this and say the arm is lateral to the heart. Okay? Any questions? Also, we have another term also related to medial and lateral. We call it intermediate. Intermediate is used when I'm comparing three organs. Comparing three organs according to their relationship to the median plane. So the one closest to the median plane, I'm going to say it's medial. And the one that is farthest away, I'm going to say it's lateral. If I have a third organ now in the middle, I'm going to call it intermediate. I'm going to call it what? Intermediate. For example, the collarbone is intermediate between the breastbone and the shoulder. Notice here I am comparing what? The shoulder, the breastbone, the collarbone. If I'm comparing only the shoulder and the breastbone, I'm going to say breastbone is medial to the shoulder or shoulder is lateral to the breastbone. Now, he is giving me a third organ, collarbone, and he wants me to describe it in relation to the shoulder and the breastbone. What do I say? Collarbone is intermediate between the shoulder and the breastbone. Another term, but it is only related to the upper and lower limbs. So memorize this. Proximal and distal are only used with the upper and lower limbs. We don't use proximal and distal to describe structures in the trunk, in the pelvis, in the abdomen, in the thorax. They are only used to describe structures in the upper limb and lower limb. So each limb is actually attached to the body. So the upper limb, the area of the shoulder, attaches it to the body. The lower limb, the area of the hip, attaches it to the body. When I compare two structures located in the limb, whether it is upper or lower, when I'm comparing two structures, the structure which is closer to the root of the limb, we call the area where the limb attached to the body, we call it the root of the limb. So the structure closer to the root of the limb, we will call it proximal. The structure which is away from the root, we will call it distal. For example, the elbow, this is the elbow joint, is proximal to the wrist. The wrist is the joint of your hand. So the elbow closer to the root. So we're going to say the elbow is proximal to the wrist. What if I reverse the comparison? If I ask you, describe the wrist in relation to the elbow, you would say the wrist is distal to the elbow. Okay? Same thing in the lower limb. If I'm comparing the thigh to the knee, I'm going to say the thigh is proximal to the knee. If I'm comparing the knee in relation to the thigh, I'm going to say the knee is distal to the thigh. So with structures in the upper and lower limbs, we use proximal and distal to describe their location in relation to the root of the limb. Another term or pair of terms, superficial and deep. So when the structure is actually closer to the surface of the body, and I don't care which surface, is it the anterior surface or the posterior surface? The one closer to the surface, I'm gonna call it what? Superficial. The one away, we will call it deep. So if you compare the skin of your chest and the breastbone, so the skin is superficial to the breastbone, or you can say the breastbone is deep to the skin. Let's have another example. What about the skin of your back and the vertebral column? The vertebral column is located anterior to the skin of your back. But what about superficial and deep? I would say the skin of the back is superficial to the vertebral column. See, so superficial and deep are not exactly like anterior posterior. They can differ. They can be the same in certain areas. When we talk about the anterior half of the body, when we talk about the posterior half of the body, no, they can be different. Now let's talk about the regional terms, how we name the areas of the body. You will notice that this chart, for example, it showed you the human body, it showed you the main regions. This is the head, the neck, this is the thorax, this is the abdomen and the pelvis, this is the groin, the inguinal region, thigh, knee, leg, and foot. Now let me ask you a question. You know that we have part of the vertebral column is located in the neck, right? And the vertebral column is composed of vertebra. What do we call the vertebra in the neck? Do we call it the neck vertebra?
Cervical, I think.
Thank you, cervical. So in anatomy, we like to use a special kind of English, okay? We don't like to use the same English that normal people uses. So if someone out of medical school, if you tell him that we have something in the neck, what do we call it? Called vertebra, what do we call it? He will say neck vertebra. You in medical school now, you should realize that when I like to describe something as being related to the neck, I use the word cervical. I use the word cervical. So this is what I mean by the regional terms in anatomy. We have special words in English that refers to the body regions. So the word cervical, even to an English person whose native language is English, the word cervical will be new, will be something that he will learn if he goes to medical school. Okay? So now what I'm gonna do, I will go through this chart. We will go through the regions and the organs of the body one by one and see the common name and the regional term. The regional term. For example, you all know that this is the nose. But if I want to describe something in anatomy, I will use the word nasal. So the cartilage in the nose, I will call it nasal cartilage. Again, the mouth. All of you know the word mouth. If I want to describe a structure inside the mouth, I use oral, thank you. So if I want to refer to the cavity of the mouth, I would say oral cavity, not mouth cavity. Same thing with the neck. I'm going to use the word cervical, cervical vertebra, cervical cutaneous nerves. So knowing these terms in this introduction, as you go through anatomy and learn the names of the arteries, name of the nerves, veins, muscles, the names will make sense to you. Again, if we go to the area of the shoulder, there's the topmost area in the shoulder. We have a bone there. It's called acromion. So when I want to refer to this area, I will use the word acromial. Again, your armpit, the area between your body and upper limb, which contain epicrine sweaty glands. If you remember, what do we call the armpit? We don't call it armpit in anatomy textbook. We call it axillary. Same thing. The abdomen or the belly. In common English, they call it the belly. What do we call it? Abdominal. The arm. For example, the artery that passes through the arm. What do I call it? I will call it brachial artery. The anterior aspect of your elbow joint. Gonna call it antecubital. Notice, we're talking about the anterior view. The forearm, this part of your upper limb is called the forearm. When I want to refer or describe structures in it, I will use the term antebrachial. Epicrine glands contain the smelly glands, you know? The smelly sweat comes from the epicrine sweaty gland. But it's not our subject here. Okay. When we want to describe the area of the pelvis, we say the term pelvic. You know, some terms are easy, they are matched, sometimes they are not. So pelvic. So pelvic nerves, for example. The area of the wrist, we call it carpal. So the bones in the wrist, what do I call them? I don't call them wrist bones, I call them carpal bones. What about your thumb? We call it pollex. So the thumb, we use the term pollex. What about the anterior surface of your hand? We call it palmar. Or your fingers, we call it digital. The genital region, where the genitals are, we call it pubic. The anterior aspect of your knee, we call it patellar. So patellar refers to the anterior aspect of your knee. The anterior aspect of your leg, we call it crural. What about your foot? The entire foot, we use the word pedal for it. So pedal means foot. Now, if I want to be specific, the ankle joint, you know, your ankles, the area of the ankles, we call it tarsal. And the toes, I'm going to call it digital. Your big toe, we'll call it the hallux. The side or the lateral aspect of your leg, I'm going to call it fibular or peroneal. Anterior aspect of your thigh, I'm going to call it femoral. The area now between your thigh and your abdominopelvic area, we call it what? We call it inguinal. The hip or the lateral aspects of the hip, we call it coxal. The belly button, the area of the belly button, for example, we call it umbilical. The areas of the breast, we call it mammary. And your entire chest, we call it thoracic. The middle area of your chest, where your sternum will be located, we call it sternal. Your chin, for example, we call it mental. So the nerve that supplies this area, for example, your chin, we don't call it chin nerves. We call it mental nerve. Same thing with your cheeks. The nerve which supplies your cheeks, we don't call it cheek nerve, we call it buccal nerve. The cavity where your eyes is located. Come on. The cavity, so orbital cavity, I don't call it eye cavity. The front area of your head, the forehead, We call it frontal. So you should be able, if I put the pointer in any of these areas, you should be able to tell me the regional term. Also, if I use a common name, you should be able to match it to the regional term. Exactly. This is why the part of the brain located just deep to your forehead, we call it the frontal lobe. Why do we call it the frontal lobe? Because it is related to the forehead. Let's take a look now at the posterior. So the head, we use the word cephalic. Cephalic, it means toward the head, or related to the head, sorry, not toward the head. Cranial, it means toward the head. Cephalic, it means it is related to the head. So we have the upper extremity, and the hand, we use the word manus. The area of the ear, we call it otic. The back of your head, we use the word occipital. Acromial is the same, both anterior and posterior. Your vertebral column or the spine, we call it vertebral. This area here, this is the area where your scapula, a bone named scapula, is located, the shoulder blade. We call this area the scapular. Scapular. Brachial is the same, both anterior and posterior. The back of the elbow is called olecranal. What about the anterior of the elbow? What do we call it? We've just passed through that. Antecubital, thank you. So antecubital. Now, in the lower back, on either side of the vertebral column, we have what we call the lumbar region. The lumbar region. In common English, we use the word loins. When you go to the butcher to buy meat, I'm sure you came across the word tenderloin. So tenderloin or loins, in Arabic it means الخاصرة يعني. So in anatomy we like to use the word lumbar. And the area between the hips, we call it sacral, the most inferior part. The butt or the buttock, we use the term gluteal. The area between the two thighs, where the internal genital organs will be located, this is the perineal. The posterior aspect of the thigh, the same thing, we use femoral. The posterior aspect of the knee, we call it popliteal. What did we call the anterior aspect of the knee? Patellar. Now, the posterior aspect of the leg, we call it soral. What did we call the anterior aspect?
Crural.
Crural. Your heels, we call it calcaneal. The sole of your feet or your foot, the inferior surface of your foot, we call it plantar. All right? Now let's talk about the planes. So we have two vertical planes, median and the frontal, and we have one horizontal plane, the transverse plane. You should be able to describe precisely each plane. So let's start with the median plane. The median plane. So the median, notice that it's called also mid-sagittal. So mid-sagittal, the same meaning as median. Okay? So median plane it's a plane, it's a vertical plane. That's the first condition. So it's a vertical plane. It passes exactly through the center of the body. It divides the body into equal right and left halves. Okay? So do you expect the median plane to pass through the lung?
No.
No. It will pass exactly in the middle. Things that are located in the middle of the body, it will pass through them. Okay? Now, what about the frontal plane? Frontal plane, this one here, again, it is a vertical plane. And this plane divides the body into anterior and posterior parts. Anterior and posterior parts. What about the transverse plane? The transverse plane is now a horizontal plane, divides the body into superior and inferior parts. Superior and inferior parts. Notice that we can have only one median plane. We can have plenty of transverse planes, depending on what level you want to make them. We can have plenty of frontal planes, depending on which area you want them to divide anterior and posterior. And all the three planes are what? Are at right angles. So the angle is 90 degrees between each two planes. Okay? Now, if I have a plane that is parallel to the median plane, what do I call it?
Sagittal.
Was that?
Proxy sagittal.
Parasagittal.
Okay.
Parasagittal, okay? So we can have many parasagittal planes. We can have many parasagittal planes. So what are the conditions of the parasagittal plane? It's a vertical plane, parallel to the median. It divides the body into unequal right and left parts. Okay? Another thing you need to identify is the body cavities and membranes. We talked about two main body cavities, the dorsal and the ventral body cavities. And the dorsal group, we said it has the cranial cavity. This is where your brain is located. And we have the vertebral cavity. This is where your spinal cord is located. So these are the dorsal cavities. What about the ventral? The ventral cavities, we have the thoracic cavity. We have the abdominopelvic cavity. Abdominopelvic, why do I say abdominopelvic? Because there's no boundary between them. For example, we have the diaphragm, the muscle called diaphragm we use in breathing. It separates the thorax from the abdomen. But for the abdomen and the pelvis, they are continuous with each other. Okay? So sometimes we call them abdominopelvic cavity, or we say abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity to make it easy. All right? Now, let's look at an anterior view. You notice that the thoracic cavity is subdivided into two lateral cavities where your lung and the pleural cavities are located. And in the middle, the space in the middle, we call it mediastinum. What do we call it? Mediastinum. What do I have in the mediastinum? I have the heart and the major blood vessels, the arch of aorta, brachiocephalic trunk. So in the thorax, Laterally, I have, you can call it cavities, you can call it spaces. This is the lung and the pleural cavity. And in the middle, I have the mediastinum. What do I have in the mediastinum? I have the heart and the major blood vessels. The diaphragm separates the thorax from the abdominopelvic space. Are we cool about this?
Yes, doctor.
So the thoracic cavity is one cavity. I don't have, again, I don't have partitions or boundary. But the area where the lungs are located, I will call it lung and the pleural cavity. The area in the middle, I'm going to call it mediastinum. Where do I find the heart? In the mediastinum. Where do I find the major blood vessels, the arch of aorta, for example? In the mediastinum. The other topics we need to study are the serous cavities and membranes. Serous cavities and membranes. Our internal organs, not all of them, but many of them, they will not lift without covering, because they will start rubbing against each other and this will make friction and it's not healthy. So, subhanallah, we have membranes that cover these organs to decrease the friction and provide healthy environment. And these membranes are made of epithelial tissue. Okay? So they are made of epithelium. They are two-layered. Each membrane is composed of two layers. Are you with me? Two layers. Are the layers separated? No, they are connected with each other. Look at the dark blue line here. This represents the serous cavity of the heart. It has two layers. The two layers are connected with each other. And if the two layers are connected, I'm going to have a space between them. This space will have a small amount of fluid so that friction will be decreased. Now, the membrane of each organ is given a name. For example, the serous membrane of the heart, I'm going to call it what? Pericardium. What do I call it? Pericardium. What about the two layers? Do they have special names? Yes. The layer located exactly over the heart or on the heart, I'm going to call it what? Visceral pericardium. Visceral pericardium. The layer which is away, or it will be not exactly on the heart, it will be facing the organs around the heart. What do I call it? Parietal pericardium. Parietal pericardium. So the visceral layer is the layer located exactly on the organ. Okay? The layer located exactly on the organ, I'm going to call it visceral. The other layer, I'm going to call it parietal. What about the small space between the two layers? I'm going to call it pericardial cavity. I'm going to call it what? Pericardial cavity. Now, a question. Is the heart located in the pericardial cavity?
No.
No, thank you. So the two layers and the cavity are surrounding the heart. So don't fall into this mistake. The heart is not located inside the pericardial cavity. No, the pericardial cavity is surrounding the heart. Both the pericardium, visceral, parietal, and the cavity and the heart, they are all located where? In the mediastinum. In the mediastinum, the central space in the chest. Any questions before we proceed? Okay. Same thing. Visceral is the one attached. Visceral is the one facing the organ. Okay? Parietal is the one facing the area around the organ. All right. So let's talk. Maybe it will become clear when we talk about the lung. First question you need to ask: what do we call the serous? Yes, outer and inner. The inner is called visceral. The outer is called parietal. Now, what do we call the serous membrane of the lung? What do we call it? Plural.
Plural cavity.
Plural is adjective. We call it pleura. So the serous membrane of the lung, we call it pleura. The parietal layer, we call it parietal pleura. And the visceral layer, visceral pleura. Which one opposing the lung? So which layer of the pleura will be facing the heart?
The parietal plural. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, the parietal plural.
Visceral.
The parietal pleura, yeah. So the parietal pleura will be facing the heart. Which layer will be on the lung itself?
Visceral plural.
It's the visceral pleura. Okay. More examples. We have a serous membrane located mainly in your abdomen. This time it actually covers multiple organs. It covers multiple organs, not only one organ. What do you call the serous membrane in the abdomen?
Peritoneum.
Peritoneum. Thank you. So peritoneum is a serous membrane found in the abdomen, and it covers multiple organs like the liver, the stomach, parts of the large intestine, part of the small intestine. They are all covered by peritoneum. Same thing for each organ. We will have visceral peritoneum covering the organ, and parietal facing the outer area, and the space between them, we call it peritoneal cavity. We call it peritoneal cavity. More cavities to study in the body. To know that the cavity of the eye, we call it orbital. The cavity of the nose, we call it nasal. You can see it here in the cross section. Sorry, in frontal section or coronal section. What am I doing here? This is a sagittal section, sorry. So this is a sagittal section. We can see the inner aspect of the nose, nasal cavity, the inner aspect of your mouth, oral cavity. If we go inside the ear to reach the cavity of the middle ear, otic cavity, the cavity where the joints between bones are located, and these joints will be covered not by a serous membrane, by synovial membrane. What is synovial? Synovial, when the cavity is covered by connective tissue, we call it synovial. Okay? Now, one of you made a question. Why it is sagittal? Look that this person is facing to the side, not front. So, how did we cut it? Did we cut it into right and left or anterior and posterior?
Anterior,
We cut it.
posterior,
Was that?
and left.
So we cut it into right and left halves, and we removed one half so that we can see the inside. So if you look at this picture, at the picture of this head, for example, you should say this is a sagittal section. Okay? But I'm looking at it from inside. The subdivisions of the abdominal cavity. How one of you is asking, how will I use the best to illustrate the relationship between two organs? In the exam, I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna tell you when you are describing the wrist in relation to the shoulder, the wrist is, and I'm gonna give you choices. So I'm not gonna tell you define the relationship between the wrist and shoulder. It's not a short essay in the written exam. The OSB, yeah, it will be, you need to write. But in the written exam, there will be choices for you. Yes, the midterm, it's all multiple choice questions. So the division of the abdominopelvic cavity, when I give you an organ, you should be able to tell, is it in the right upper quadrant? Is it in the right lower, in the left, or in the left upper? Well, spelling, you should be careful about spelling so that we can at least read the word. If the spelling was too poor to define, to read the word, yeah, that's going to be a problem. Again, with the 9 regions, you should be able to tell if I bring you a chart without names, for example, and put an X here. So you should know that X is the right hypochondriac region. Or for example, here, you should know that this is the left iliac region, etc. All right. Now, I will leave now the mic to Dr. Ashwati to go through the stations of the from your lab manual. Dr. Ashwati?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ayman.
I will stop sharing so that you can
Yeah,
share.
thank you. Yeah, okay. So am I audible?
Doctor.
Can you hear me? Okay, so I will be going according to the lab manual. You can find the lab manual in your course content, okay, of L05 course. Now, the first station is on the anatomical positions and terms. So if you look into the lab manual, you'll have certain things which you need to identify. Okay. Now, the first thing is anterior. So the first body which you see on the left side is actually the anterior view. Can you see that? And this is actually the posterior view. Okay. Now, what is medial? What is lateral? So the medial is actually, it is in the midline, isn't it? So this will be medial and away from the midplane will be lateral. Okay. Now, what is inferior and superior? So all these things have been mentioned by Dr. Ryman. So superior is actually towards the head end. So this will be the superior portion of the body, and then you will have the inferior part. Okay. Now, proximal and distal, as Dr. Ryman has already mentioned, we usually use it with the limbs. Okay. Now, if you want to say, I can say that the elbow is distal to the shoulder. Okay. So this will be the proximal part and this is the distal portion. Now, superficial and deep is also mentioned. Now, I'll go to the station 2. Now, the station 2 is on the regions of the body. So we'll go to the anterior view. Now, tell me what is the antecubital or the cubital view? The antecubital or cubital, you can unmute. One of you can unmute and tell also, because it has been already done. What is antecubital?
What antecubital is in the arm?
Yeah, which part of the arm is antecubital?
It's the anterior
No,
elbow.
that one.
Yeah, so it is the friend of the elbow. Okay, can you see my pointer? Okay.
Yes, we can see.
So this antecubital is the anterior part of the elbow, the friend of the elbow. Now, what is brachial?
The forearm, which is
The arm.
Not the
inferior
forearm,
to the-
actually it's the arm, the upper arm. So this is actually your brachium. So in this model, you can see this is the brachium, the upper arm. Okay, it's a brachial region. Now, what is nasal region?
Nose.
The nose.
Yeah, so the nose region is the area of the nose. That is the nasal region. Now, which is the antebrachial region?
It's the forearm.
The forearm.
Yes, the forearm, you call it as the antebrachial region. Okay. Now, tell me what is the femoral region?
The thigh.
Femoral.
The thigh.
Yeah, exactly. So the thigh is actually the femoral region. Okay. Now, what is the crural region? Crural.
This
Have you heard of crural region?
leg.
Yes. So the anterior part of the leg, okay, the lower leg, you call it as the crural region. Okay. Now, what is the inguinal region? Inguinal.
Is the pelvic area.
Is that the pelvic area?
No, it's
Yeah,
the
it's a groin. Okay.
pubic
So
area.
can you see this area which is situated at the junction of your trunk and your thigh? So this portion is practically, you call it as the inguinal region. Okay. So this is the inguinal region. Agreed? Now, which is the palmar region?
Of your hand.
Yeah, so this portion of the hand, can you see the palmar region, the palm of the hand? So that is the palmar region. Now tell me what is the orbital region?
Is the eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the eye region. Around the eye, you call it as the orbital region. Now the mental region is where? Mental.
The chin.
Very good. So it's a chin region. So the chin region, you call it as a mental region. Now, which is the umbilical region?
Belly button area.
The belly button.
Yeah, so the navel. So this portion, you call it as the umbilical region. Okay. Now, where is the perineal region? Perineal.
It is the back.
No.
Perineal.
So it's the
The
area
sides
which
of
you
the-
see
of
when
the
you,
leg?
yeah, between the thighs. Okay. The area which you see between the thighs, between your genitals and the anus. So that area you call it as the perineal region. Okay. So that is the perineal region. If you want to see the perineal region, you have to, separate the thighs. Okay. You have to look between the thighs. So that is the perineal region. Now, which is the axillary region?
Underarms.
Yeah, the armpit. Can you see that? So that is the axilla. Okay, the axillary region. Now the buccal region is where?
The cheeks.
So cheek is actually the buccal region. Now the cervical is cervical.
The neck.
Yeah, exactly. So the neck region is the cervical region. Now where is the mental region? Mental.
And
It's
Pardon?
chin.
Yeah, very good. So that's a chin region. Can you see the chin over here? Can you see my pointer there? So that's the chin region or the mental region. Now, what is the sternal region?
it's the between the pop it's between the pectoral regions.
Okay, let me. So, can you see the breastbone where my
Breastbone.
pointer is there? The sternum. So, the area overlying the sternum, you call it as the sternal region. Okay. So, this portion you call it as the sternal region. Now, which is the carpal region? Carpal.
It's the wrist of your hand.
Yeah, the wrist region is known as the carpal region. You can see the carpal region here. Now the pedal region is
Pedal is both the
not the leg, it's
the
a foot.
tarsal
Okay.
and
The foot.
The foot is the pedal region. Okay. Now, which is the acromial region? Acromial. So acromial region
shoulder
is the point of prominence on your shoulder. Now you can you can feel that prominence. Okay, you can feel a bony prominence on your body. So that point of shoulder, you call it as the acromial region. Okay. Now, which is the pelvic region? So the area which is overlying the pelvis. Okay. Yeah, exactly, Sarah. That is the pelvic region. Now tell me, where is the clavicular region? Can you see the clavicle? Clavicular. Clavicular. So clavicle is a bone. Can you see this bone here? The beauty bone?
yes.
Okay. So this area overlying the clavicle, you call it as the clavicular region. The collarbone, exactly. So that is a clavicular region. Is that clear? Okay, shall I go to the next station, the station 3? Okay. Now, the station 3, as you can see, it is a posterior view of the body, isn't it? The posterior view of the body, and we are going to see some of the regions in the posterior part of your body. Now, what is a nuchal region? Nuchal. Have you heard about nuchal? N-U-C-H-A-L. Nuchal. No, that is not hand. No, that is manus. So nuchal is the back of the neck. Okay, so this region, the back of the neck has got a special name and you call it as a nuchal region. Okay, is that clear?
Sorry, doctor.
Now, what is the occipital region?
That's the back of the head.
Very good. So the back of the head, can you see the back of the head? You call it as the occipital region. Now, which is the scapular region? Scapular.
Is the back or the dorsal region.
Yeah, the shoulder blade. Can you see? You can see the prominence of your shoulder blade. Can you see that? So this region, you call it as the scapular region. Okay? Is it clear? Now, what is the vertebral region?
The spinal
Very good. So the area of the spinal cord. So this region, can you see? If you can see, if you look into this model, you can see the prominences of vertebra. Can you see that? So this region is actually known as a vertebral, the area of the spinal cord. Now, which is a gluteal region?
Butt.
Yeah, so the butts, the gluteal region is the region of the buttocks. Okay. Now, tell me where is a popliteal region? Popliteal.
Is behind. It is on top of the leg. This place.
Exactly. So behind the knee, can you see this area? So this is the popliteal region. Okay. So what do you call the friend of the knee then?
Patellar.
Patellar region. Very good. Patellar region. Okay. Now, as we said, what is the brachial region? Brachial.
This is the arm.
Yeah. So remember, anterior as well as posterior part of the upper arm, you call it as brachial. Okay. Now, what is the sacral region? Sacral.
Is on top of the perineal.
Oh, so can you see this region where my pointer is?
It's the bottom of the vertebral region.
Exactly. So it's a area between the hips. So these are the two hip bones. So you can see the area between the hips at the base of your spine. So this region is actually your sacral region. Is that clear? So this is practically your sacral region. Now, which is the lumbar region? Lumbar.
It is at the sides of the vertebral column.
Okay, so on the sides, isn't it? So you call this region as your lumbar region. So practically, this region is between your ribs above and your hips below, isn't it? So this region on the lateral side, you call it as the lumbar region or the loin. Now, acromial, I have already mentioned, isn't it? That's a prominence of your shoulder. Very good. So tell me, what is the sural region? Sural.
Under the leg.
Under the
calf. Very good. So posterior part of your leg, you call it as, or the calf, you call it as the sural region. Okay. What did we call the anterior part of the leg? Yeah, exactly. So that was the crural. That was the crural. Femoral is the thigh region. Okay. Anterior and posterior part of the thigh, you call it as femoral. So this is also femoral. So anterior part of the thigh is also femoral. If you come to the legs, anterior part of the leg is actually crural, C-R-U-R-A-L. Okay, and the posterior, sorry, and the posterior part of the leg is actually, or the surface of the calf, you call it as sural, S-U-R-A-L. Okay. Now femoral, as I mentioned, what is femoral region?
The thighs.
The thigh region. So both anterior and posterior part of the thigh, you call it as femoral region. Now tell me, which is the antebrachial region?
Is the forearm.
The forearm, both aspects.
So this is a posterior view. We can understand even the posterior part of the forearm, you call it as antebrachial. Okay. So both anterior and posterior part of the forearm is known as antebrachial. Similarly, both anterior and posterior part of the arm, you call it as What?
Brachial.
What do you call? Brachial. Very good.
Brachial.
Brachial. Now tell me what is plantar? Plantar.
It's the sole of the
The
feet.
sole of the foot. Okay, the sole is actually the plantar. Okay, so that finishes station 3. So I'll go to station 4, which is the last station. Okay. Okay. So station 4 is on the body cavities. Now, what are the body cavities you know about?
Ventral and dorsal.
Dorsal and ventral.
Okay, ventral body cavity and dorsal body cavity, isn't it? So the first picture is actually on the ventral body cavity. Can you see the ventral body cavities here? So here you have, what do you have? This is the lungs, agreed, on either side. Can you see the heart? Can you see my pointer?
Yes.
So this, the central portion, so this is practically the region of your mediastinum, which has got the heart, and you can see the great vessels. Can you see them? So this is actually the mediastinum. So this is actually, the central portion is actually the pericardial cavity, okay? And you can see the heart. This is the region of pericardial cavity and the heart. Now, on either side or lateral to the heart,
Pleural.
you will see the pleural
Pleural.
cavity and the lungs. Can you see the lungs? So this is the lungs, and you can see the pleural cavity there. Okay. Now, so this is one of the ventral body cavities, isn't it? Now, can you see a partition here, a dome shed partition, which is
Diaphragm.
actually
Diaphragm.
what is that?
The diaphragm.
Diaphragm.
Very good. So it's a diaphragm which is going to separate your the thoracic cavity above from the abdominopelvic cavity below. Okay. Now, what do you see here? This big cavity which you see here is?
The abdominopelvic cavity.
Yeah. So this is the abdominopelvic cavity. Actually, you can see the abdominal contents. Okay. So this is the abdominal cavity. And as you know, the pelvic cavity is postero-inferior. So it is posterior as well as it is inferior to your abdominal cavity, isn't it? Is there a partition between the abdominal and pelvic cavity?
No.
No. So there is no anatomical partition, isn't it? What does your pelvic cavity contain?
The pelvis.
The pelvic cavity contains
Cavity?
organs.
The organs, the urinary tract
bladder.
organs.
Yeah, urinary
and-
bladder, then it contains your uterus, all these things, okay? The rectum, all these things are actually there in the pelvis. Is that clear? The anterior, the ventral body cavity. Now, shall we go to the dorsal body cavity? Okay, so what all cavities are you seeing here? What is the subdivision of your dorsal body
You
cavity?
have the cranial and then you have the vertebral.
Okay, so the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. So can you see the cranial cavity above? See, it's open. And what is the content of the cranial cavity? It's a brain. Very good. So that's a brain. And then lower down, can you see this yellow structure going down, down, down? What is that?
Vertebral column with the spinal
The
cord.
That is a spinal cord. No, that is a spinal cord. This bone is actually the vertebra forming the spine, okay? So this yellow structure which is running down, that is a spinal cord. So what do you call this cavity which has got the spinal cord?
Vertebral column. The vertebral cavity.
Exactly. So it's a vertebral, or you can call
The
it as a
spinal.
spinal cavity. Is that clear? The dorsal cavity? Okay. Now, okay, 1 minute, okay? Dr. Ayman,
Yes, yes.
are you there? Okay, I think the last slide is missing. So I need to check up my previous PowerPoint on, I had a plastinated model.
Let me share, but I shared the same thing. What
This
was
is the same thing which you shared, which you sent me today.
let me just find out.
Yeah,
I have
let me
something
see. Yeah.
else. one. It's about the cavities, the last.
Yeah, the plastinated models.
Okay, let me find them. Just, do you have them or? Can you download them from the email you sent to me? Okay, it will be just a minute or so until Dr. Ashwati can download the last two images. Now I'm receiving emails from some of you about studying for the course. The course is difficult. Whether you have previous exam questions or not. Unfortunately, previous exam questions are not released. So this is why we designed the quizzes for you. So the quiz gave you a sample of 15 questions. This is how we are going to test you. This is how the questions are made. So you're supposed to adjust your studying to be able to answer such questions. Notice that sometimes we ask you the question directly, and other times we put it in a clinical scenario because you are trained to be medical doctors. So instead of asking you what is the name of the posterior aspect of your knee, which is the popliteal area, so we put it in a clinical scenario. We say a patient came to the doctor complaining of a swelling in his in the area posterior to the knee. So the question is about the area posterior to the knee. What is the name of that area? So this is how the questions are made. So if you know the information, if you study your slides and textbook, you should be able to answer these questions. Okay? Dr. Ashwati, you can start. So these are plastinated models.
Okay, so I'll start.
Okay.
So again, it's a continuation of the station 4. Okay, so these are plastinated models, the real models. So what can you see? So what is this view called? It's an anterior view, isn't it? So you can make out your breastbone, the sternum, and you can make out the ribs, isn't it? Huh? Agreed? Now, this is the lateral view of the same thing. You're looking it from one side. Now, can you see a white structure in the midline? So what is that? No, the white thing, let me take my pointer.
The
So
vertebral column?
this one, practically this region.
Is it the spine?
Thoracic cavity.
Is it the thoracic cavity or something? Is it in the midline? Okay, fine. So this is actually the heart, which is in the mediastinum, which is covered with the pericardium. Okay, so what you're seeing is the tough pericardium, and if I'm going to remove the pericardium, I will see the heart. Okay, so this is actually the heart with the pericardium in the mediastinum. Agreed? Now, why this region is hollow? Yeah, the
Supposed to
lungs. So
have
the
the
lungs
ribs.
are not there, it is removed. Okay. So on either side you will have the lungs, and then you will have a midline partition or cavity or something which you call that's a mediastinum, which is actually what you see here is the heart with the pericardium. And then can you see the structure where my pointer is? What is that? It's a dome-shaped structure which is going to separate your thoracic cavity. Yeah, exactly. So that's a diaphragm. Okay, so below the diaphragm will be your abdominal cavity. I mean, nothing is there actually. What you see is a diaphragm with the heart in the mediastinum. Is that clear? Okay, so that completes actually the first lab. So you do have station 5, which is actually on anatomy table, which is a virtual dissection table, which we wouldn't do it right now. So when we get time and we don't spell G for what?
And diaphragm.
Okay, fine. So we'll do it once we are in the canvas, okay? So thank you. I hope you have understood. Okay.
Thank you,
Hyman?
Dr. Ashwati. Thank you. That was very, really comprehensive description. So for you all, that's our first introduction lab, introduction to anatomy. We will have introduction to histology. I will upload it for you. It's going to be a recorded demonstration because I'll go through different, epithelial tissue, different muscle tissue sections. So it will be a recorded lab. I will record it and upload it for you maybe later tonight or on Friday. So by this, we will have like 2 introductory labs, the one we just had and a recorded lab on histology. Thank you all and wish you a very nice weekend.
Thank you all. And happy weekends to all.